Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. As we've been talking to lawyer and paralegal bencher candidates about the upcoming election. As always, the views and opinions are of the candidates alone. They don't reflect me, Justice and Pieces, Trials College, or any other education institution or organization I'm affiliated with. Continuing on our series, we have Edward joining us. So, first of all, Edward, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me. And perhaps we can get started. You can tell us a little bit more and all the viewers about yourself.
Good afternoon, JP. Thank you so much for inviting me to the show. Very appreciate that. And a little bit about myself. I am, as you know, Edward Choi, and I practice law in Markham. I focus mostly on civil litigation, but I also do some solicitor work as well. Prior to practicing law, I have worked in the private and public and education and not-for-profit sectors. I hold a degree in a business degree from Wilfrid Laurier University. I did law school at the University of New Brunswick. I've also hold two foreign law degrees, one from the Queen Mary University of London in the United Kingdom, and a LLM from the University of Hong Kong in Hong Kong. And during the pandemic, two of my projects was I did a certificate in ethics at the then Ryerson University, now the Toronto Metropolitan University. And I am expecting to get my Bachelor of Education in Adult Education from Brock University this June. So I am running for bencher because I want to, like the Full Stop team, help everyday lawyers practice law competently and ethically and serve their clients, which is the public of Ontario. And I first learned about the Stop team, as it was called then, about 4 years ago, because the statement of principles was a concern to me, and I'm sure many lawyers. The concern was not the statement itself, but the fact that it was, and I think everyone agrees that diversity is important, equity, diversity, non-discrimination is very important to people. But the fact that it's a forced statement, and if you don't make that statement, you risk losing your license, that was a concern because lawyers represent everyday people. And in a democracy, in a free and democratic society, it's important that there's voices and views, diverse views and diverse opinions. And with that, if lawyers have to comply with a type of speech that is required by a regulator, then it's a slippery slope. I wouldn't say this particular statement would completely damage it, but it's a slippery slope to more aggressive forced speech, which we do not want to see going down that route. So that's why I was supporting the Stop team, and I'm happy that they got rid of the statement of principles, and they only had a minority, right, at the times, and they also were able to influence the Law Society to reduce fees. So this time around, there's more to do, right? Stop creep, stop bloat, and stop woke, and returning the Law Society as a neutral regulator, which is something I share with the Full Stop team, and that's why they invited me to join their team a few months ago. So, I looked at the platform and I completely agree with it in terms of returning the LSO as a neutral regulator, effectively regulated competence and ethics, but not over-regulating, respecting each other in a non-discriminatory way, protecting rights and freedoms for members, including no forced speech, keeping the LSO accountable so that LSO fees are transparent, justified, and that everyday members of the Law Society can see what's going on in the Law Society. This is very important to me. In addition, for myself, I feel that access to justice is very important to me. For myself, I have volunteered at 4 different legal clinics. I have attended legal conferences where I networked with legal aid executives and volunteers and people who work for them. And I've also been during COVID, I've been part of a steering committee, and we have created a new legal clinic in Ontario, the CCM Legal Clinic in Markham. And that's why I feel that I understand the needs of the legal clinics, and I want to improve Bylaw 7, which is the part of it is a civil society organization. I want to improve that section of it so that it supports more private legal clinics and improve access to justice. I also want to support a relevant lawyer licensing process. To that end, I have participated in the LSO dialogue on licensing a few years ago, and I have received a legal education in both Ontario, as in Canada and abroad. And I feel that I have a lot to contribute in this, in addition to my education degree. I want to keep the LSO accountable. I have a business degree, and I have some auditing and board experience, which will help me in that endeavor, ensuring that it's transparent and that people can see what's going on in the Law Society. I support freedoms and diversity. I'm part of the Markham Race Relations Committee, so diversity is important to me, as well as ensuring that fundamental freedoms in our charters are protected. And I want to maintain a high standard in building a good reputation for our profession. And my experience in advocating for high academic standards and relevant policies on a law faculty board and in a university senate, along with adjudicating on 2 academic discipline committees, will help me in that endeavor. And may I add, I'm also a public library board member, and libraries are really important to me. I hear rumors that we're somehow trying to reduce funding for the libraries. That's not true. I completely support libraries so long as they support lawyers and the public, and I hope that will continue. And I'm running with the Full Stop team, and that is the reason I'm running for Venture.
All right, Edward. So there's a lot in there. So let's kind of try to maybe parse it out piece by piece there. So of course, you brought up the statement of principles. It was repealed. We've removed it. So then, where in terms of the motive to run here, with that gone, I mean, shouldn't it be kind of like the stop or now the Full Stop group kind of got that big accomplishment, and we got the feather in our cap, mission accomplished. Why the need to kind of continue and run for this election?
So the need to, it's a very positive first step that the statement of principles was abolished, and we hope that it doesn't come again. But I think we also need to remember that there are benchers who are running who have been supporting the statement of principles even after the Stop team have been formed, even after the Stop team have got 22 benchers in convocation, and they have even argued and made a motion to have the statement of principles kept there. So, or at least they didn't agree with abolishing the statement of principles then. There's also more to that. There's more things that they want to do with the statement of principles and the like. They've also said that they want to increase regulation. They want to increase LSO fees. And not only is that concerning in terms of, as I mentioned earlier, for speech and that we don't have a diversity of views, if it's a slippery slope for that, but also more regulation means more resources, means more fees, and we want to stop that, right? We want to ensure that the Law Society becomes a neutral regulator without an ideology and without forcing everyone to have an ideology, that we support the public, whatever their views are. Of course, we need to ensure that people comply with non-discriminatory, and we have the rules of professional conduct to do so, right? So, and that will be enforced. But we want to ensure that we're not over-regulating, we're not overcharging our members, and that the members' hard-earned money is used wisely and transparently, and that we do not, for example, the last time around, they tried to, the other side tried to implement this inclusion index, for example. This is a project that, in our view, is not methodology sound, and it costs a lot of money, And it's not the role of the LSO. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be done at all, but it shouldn't be the role of LSO to regulate how lawyers and law firms should think. And there is perhaps other platforms to do this, but not using our members' money and resources to do so. So that's why I think that's important.
Edward, you brought up this neutral regulator, right? And in terms, certainly, you can look at it from the other side there. But I mean, isn't there a point there that I've certainly seen brought up that having no regulation is almost like going in the other direction, right? It's just saying that, hey, we're not accepting of some of these views, so therefore, kind of, it tilts. No, the pendulum sort of swings the other way, right? It's not truly neutral if you're not looking at, let's say, some of the ideological views that were brought up, let's say, from the Good Governance Coalition as an example. I mean, how would you respond to kind of that commentary?
And no, JP, that's not true. We respect all views, including those from, as you mentioned, the Good Governance Coalition. It's not the role of the Law Society to accept views, right? We want to be a neutral regulator, but we want to have room for, if good governance have a view and, another independent have another view, that's fine. I think we should have a good debate about that, right? It's not the role of the Law Society of Ontario to say that this is the one and only view that we can have, right? And that's what that means. And we're not saying that there's no rules. There is rules, and we do have rules, and we will enforce those rules. Those rules are in the rules of professional conduct. For example, let me share with you Rule 6.1 6.3.1-1. That is about non-discrimination. If there is discrimination against people of different race or gender or orientation or whatever, those can be enforced, right? And those will be enforced under full stop. And that is where I think we need to focus on. We need to focus on competence. We need to focus on ethics. And because I hear the other side talking about we are a threat to self-regulation, but what is a threat to self-regulation? If you look at other jurisdictions, for example, England and Wales, right? They no longer have complete self-regulation because it took too long for disciplinary cases to be heard, sometimes a few years. And we don't want to go through that route, because if our focus is on regulating competence and ethics, we won't go through that route because that's where our resources is. But if we're embarking on many other projects, we won't have the time and resources to do so unless you increase the fees. So one way or another, it's going to hurt the lawyers. And if it hurts lawyers, that means higher fees for the public, and it will not be in the public interest, in my view, if that happens. So no, I completely do not agree that we're not regulating at all. We are regulating, and we are ensuring that that lawyers are competent and provide competent and ethical services to the public in Ontario, and that's very important to us.
Okay, Edward, so let's look at that the point of bloat there. Let's kind of look at those three pieces there, right? Because we were just talking about fees and costs there. Now, I mean, the other thing that comes up is, hey, if we go and say we're going to try to cut fees 15% or something, right? And then you got to look into the budget. You talked about libraries being something that's important, in your outside of law, right, that you're involved with. And again, you hear, well, there's a threat perhaps to the law libraries, the law associations, if there is less funding available to them, or if it's sort of offshore to the Law Foundation of Ontario, right? So how can you sort of look at areas of cutting what's the bloat, or maybe have you identified where there may be? And I know obviously you're not an incumbent bencher, so it's not the same as talking to the incumbents there, but where do you sort of see this bloat, and how sort of to make informed based decisions surrounding those cuts? Because again, there could be unintended consequence, right? You cut from the libraries, let's say, then somebody doesn't have access to case law that they would otherwise have, and then they don't do a good job for their client, and then they get a complaint, and then it goes to discipline, right? So you take from the left and you spend on the right. So what would you sort of say in terms of addressing the bloat effectively?
So JP, one thing I will promise you is that I will not support cuts in terms of competence and ethics, in terms of and I will spend a lot of time on if I can on the disciplinary tribunal, and those will not be cut. And in terms of in terms of libraries, on the prima facie, I support them as long as they support the work of lawyers in the public of Ontario. But so the advantage of being on a team, the full stop team here, is the ability to learn and share with other members on the team. And I have discussed this issue with previous benchers, and one of the things they did was they asked the Law Society to come up with a hypothetical budget. What would happen if we cut 10% of the fees, 5% of the fees, 20% of the fees, or whatever, right? And the idea of that is to see what the effect is, because we want to cut responsibly. We're not just cutting fees. We need to ensure that critical services that are important to lawyers and the public of Ontario is there, right? Like the law libraries, as you mentioned, like disciplinary tribunals. We want to ensure that that's there, and that's important. So the first step to doing that is to see where the cuts can happen. We look into the financial statements. We discuss with management of the Law Society. We discuss with different parties, and we look at the numbers line by line. That is how we do it. And we will think about what would happen if we cut this thing, or another thing, right? That's how we do it. And we find bloat doing that. And I can tell you that from this exercise, the previous convocation, and it's the first time I think in a long while, there were cuts to fees. That didn't happen for a long time, and I think the reason they were able to do that is because these questions were asked and raised by the Stop team. And I think this is the way we are going to go forward in the future. We're going to ask questions about and ensure that these numbers are transparent as much as possible to our members. So we'll look at it line by line.
All right, so let's move on then to the mission creep, right? Stop creep. And we've talked about certainly a neutral regulator. But where I guess besides what we've already discussed, that you see kind of the Law Society, losing their ways or overstepping kind of where they should be as a regulatory body, right? I mean, you certainly point to competence and ethics, right? I mean, what should the Law Society's focus be on, within the four corners of the page, so to speak, in terms of regulating the profession in the public interest?
So I just want you to think about the statement of principles, right? And if that is a start to more regulations, or if you think about the inclusion index, how the Law Society is going or thinking about, at least some people are thinking about, ranking lawyers and law firms, right? That's not part of the Law Society. That sounds more part like for an independent NGO to do, not something that the Law Society as a regulator should do. What we should ensure is that all of the lawyer licensing candidates is qualified, has the competence to provide legal services and legal advice, and that lawyers who are licensed have the necessary competence and skills and knowledge to provide these services in an ethical way, right? Not defrauding clients like you see in the news sometimes, and not doing so in a discriminatory manner, or things like that. So what's in our rules of professional conduct, I agree with, right? And that's what we should be focusing on. We shouldn't be focusing on embarking projects to say how you should run your law firm, or how you should, because the fact of the matter is that there are different law firms and different lawyers catering to different niches, right? A lot of times people talk about criminal law and how sometimes lawyers would represent some people who are who doesn't have a good reputation in the society, for example, serial killers, right? We represent them because we're their voice, and if we're not there, there would be no voice. so these are things that so we need to ensure that there's different views, and so that's why we don't want to increase regulation in that regard, right? So and that's what I think you will get if you vote for the full stop team.
And then I guess the last piece there, Edward, you were talking about all the involvement you have in race relations, right? And then you have Stop Woke, and people are like, well, that kind of seems contrary to your experiences and involvement. So maybe you can help kind of explain, how those are not, diametrically opposed views there, and perhaps expand on what woke is and what Stop Woke refers to, and how that doesn't mean stop EDI, for example.
So JP, I'm not I in terms of Stop Woke, we're saying that we're stopping woke from the LSO. We're not saying that people are not able to have those views, and in fact, those views are, we in the full stop team, we have 36 bencher candidates with diverse views, and it's not that we're gonna go after people who have woke views, and we're not here to tell people what views to have. We're here to regulate competence and ethics. That's where the Law Society should. That's what the Law Society should do, right? So in that respect, I think we need to clarify this point. I'm not saying that people cannot hold these views. So I think that's where this lies. We're here to go back to where we should be, and that's to regulate competence and ethics.
And I guess in terms of then the Law Society,
and I also want to add, sorry, JP, I just wanted to add that there's different views of diversity. For example, you have people who feel that it should be based on equity, it should be based on equity of outcomes, and so on, right? That's a debate we can have, and we certainly welcome that debate, right? But it's not, but it should continue to be a debate, and we should work together to find solutions of how we can best ensure that both views are there, and that we have equality in the legal profession. And I hear the views of many that there's not enough women, or there's not enough racial minorities, or even sexual minorities, right? I hear that, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. In fact, I would like to see more of those, but we must do it in a responsible way while protecting the views of different people, and there's many ways we can deal with that. Yes.
Yeah, and I guess that's sort of where it stands there in terms of the Law Society. Obviously, you can have initiatives by the very FACL and SABA and Cable and different organizations in terms of some of those initiatives. But in terms of the Law Society, as you pointed, well, there may be people having these different experiences, and kind of where do we sort of, I don't know if you plot on that graph there, how we can kind of be attuned to it without being quote unquote woke, right? I mean, I don't know how, or the law in terms of the Law Society, right? I mean, obviously, like I pointed out, there's these different organizations that can take their own views, but how will you kind of reconcile that in terms of what the Law Society can be doing to address some of those issues you said from some of those groups, but without going to the point where it's overstepping or no longer being a neutral regulator?
Yes, and you raise a good question. I think these are important questions to have. I think what we should do is we should communicate with each other, right? It's interesting how the few the groups that are promoting diversity is supporting the establishment, and I don't think they have spoken with any of us on the full stop team on the issues of their concern. And I feel that if those are issues of concern, which I agree many of them would be, right, then we should have a dialogue on these, right? And I think that's where it should start. But if some of their former members have been calling us dangerous and a threat to self-regulation, nobodies, and unfit, that's not helpful to the conversation, right? That's not helpful for inclusivity and diversity. And I think we should have a collegial discussion about how we can deal with these issues.
Now, Edward, in terms of, I guess, the next generation there, now you touched on, articling and the transition from being a student to practicing as a lawyer or paralegal. Do you have any advice or any words of wisdom surrounding that point as well? But for the students and the newly licensed as they look to kind of advance in the profession?
Yes, of course. I think it's important for students, for paralegals and lawyers to explore what their calling is, why they want to practice law, why this is important to them. And, I think we need to welcome students of different views and different ethnicities, different genders, and, all different backgrounds. I think a diverse bar would be a better bar, right? And I hope that everyone would think about why they are getting into law, and not just because of money, but also think about what their interests are, and look at that. I see a lot of people going into law school, for example, just for money, or to work for a Bay Street firm. But I think there's a lot more to offer in this legal profession than just that. And I would also remind students to think about their statement, the statement of interest that they wrote for law school or paralegal school, right? And reflect on that, and perhaps they might want to think about what they want to accomplish from that. Think about 50 years from now, and work back from there to see what the route is to accomplish what they want to accomplish. Some people might be to run for benchers. Some people might be to run a small law firm. Some people might be to work for Bay Street firms. There's different callings, and some people might be there to work for NGOs or volunteer for NGOs. I think there's so much to look into, and I think one should seriously consider what their calling is, what their plan is, and what their interests are, and explore what there is to offer. And and the other thing I wanted to say is it's important for students to take breaks. I know lawyers and law students often work really hard, and it's important to take care of your mental and physical health as well.
Now, Edward, first of all, thanks again for taking the time and joining us here today and sharing about the upcoming election. Final question for you, perhaps the most challenging, because you're going to talk about yourself there, or but certainly maybe the most important, right, for any of the viewers that are listening that have up to 40 votes in this upcoming election. Why should they consider voting for you?
So lawyers have three choices here: to vote for the establishment team, to vote for independents, or to vote for the full stop team. If you want, big governance, if you want your LSO fees to be raised, you want more regulation, and you want then you should vote for the establishment team. Okay. And but I think we can't afford more regulation and fees, especially for young lawyers, sole practitioners, small firms, and even for some big firms. The other choice is independence. I think there are many well-intentioned independents in there, but the problem is there, as you mentioned, there's 40 elected lawyer benchers, another 5 and another 8 which are appointed. One bencher cannot really get things done by him or herself, and so I think that would be the drawback of voting independent. The benefit of voting for the full stop team is we are your everyday lawyers. We can be your voice. And we are a team of men and women of diverse backgrounds and practices, some in small firms, some in big firms, some are sole practitioners, some are, we have a crown, we have government lawyers, university professors, and so on. And we have candidates of different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different ages, and half of them have relevant experience on the bench. And that is an advantage because they can share their expertise, and we have diverse views, and we can get things done. And with and I would add, without a majority during the last election, this team has helped reduce fees and get rid of the statement of principles while maintaining important services like libraries and all of that. And I believe that this team will continue to do that work if we get reelected as a team. Now, for myself personally, I support access to justice. I support and I understand the LSO from both a members and an employee perspective. I support a relevant lawyer licensing process. I will keep the LSO accountable. I support freedoms and diversity. And I am committed to the LSO maintaining professional and ethical standards, which will build a good reputation for our profession. So I would hope that everyone will consider voting for Edward Choi and the Full Stop team. And if you do, together we can create a just, competent, ethical legal profession and a law society that is accountable to you and to the public of Ontario.
Perfect. So once again, thanks so much, Edward, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. All the best. Take care.
Thank you, JP.